Hi, my name is Mia, and today I'm going to be talking about the stigma surrounding depression and a little bit about how that stops people from getting help, but probably mostly going to be sticking with the stigma around depression. Also, before I start, sorry if I keep glancing this way, it's because my notes are right there and I don't want to miss anything. So I'm going to start off by just defining stigma, and this seems kind of silly, but one of the research papers that I will reference later actually has an issue with their results because people define stigma differently. So for the purposes of what I'll be talking about today, I'm using the Merriam-Webster definition of stigma, and that is a set of negative and unfair beliefs that a society or group of people have about something. So that's that. So now that that's cleared up, gonna talk about depression now. So, a psychiatry.org article explains that depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. Depression causes feelings of sadness and or a loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed. It also notes that, fortunately, it's treatable, which we'll get to later. So, depression, like it says, it's common, but there is so much stigma around it, despite how many people experience depression, even just for like a minor part of their lives. Like there are some people who it never leaves them. It's treatable, but that doesn't make it completely erased. When I think of treatable in this context, I more so think of the fact that you can make it less bad, you can make it survivable, I guess, livable, whereas for some people, it's there for a few months and then they never experience it again. Either way, there are a lot of like common symptoms, and the list that I'm about to go through is from one article from the New York Times, and it lists a few common symptoms, which are poor appetite or overeating, insomnia or excessive daytime sleepiness, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration or difficulty making decisions, and feelings of hopelessness. I do want to note that this is in reference to persistent depression disorder, persistent depressive disorder. I get stuck on my words sometimes. Which I believe is different because the article that it's from says you can still function, and the article is also called, that lingering meh feeling has a name, which I feel like if you're just talking about regular depression, it's more so just like a weighing feeling and not just described as meh. But that's not scientific. That's just how I think of it. And a lot of these symptoms that are listed overlap with what people see as laziness. Like overeating, if someone gains weight, people are like, oh, so you're lazy? Oh, so you're not doing as much? Which isn't true. You could gain weight for so many different reasons, and that is such, in my opinion, a dumb line of reasoning. I digress. Excessive daytime sleepiness, low energy, and also poor concentration. As someone with ADHD, one of my big things is like, it takes me so long to get things done, and I can't concentrate, and that makes me not want to do things, and that makes people go lazy. And I also think that that's a common thing with depression as well. I talked to a few friends that have experiences with depression, and 2 out of the 3 people that I asked about it said that they were embarrassed by their depression because it came across as laziness. Mostly their inability to do homework, sleeping in late, and not being able to keep up with what most people see as basic self-care. And I feel like that also goes hand in hand with the symptoms I just listed. This connected with something I just said, and I can't quite remember what I just said, so I'm gonna take a pause for a second just to see if I can figure that out. I think I was gonna say with like the lack of concentration, but I can't remember, so I'm not going to. And I think back to my little references of my friends, I think this is such a common feeling because laziness itself is stigmatized. Um, Mental illness and laziness tend to go hand in hand. Like, again, sorry if I use ADHD a lot, it's just my own personal comparison. And it does have a lot of things in common with the symptoms of depression, which I think is interesting. Um, but yeah, so mental illness and laziness go hand in hand, and it just makes you feel so bad about yourself because you don't want people to think that you are lazy. Um, but I feel like when people are like, I don't want to be seen as lazy, it's because that makes people think that there's something wrong with you and that you aren't doing life the right way, which is a very similar feeling of guilt that people get when they have mental illnesses. Um, so an article I read titled The Stigma Behind Laziness and Its Impact on Mental Health says that, simply put, we are cast in a negative light because we are conditioned to be fast-moving, productive, efficient, and swift. And I took that as a direct quote because, oh my god, I think that is a genius thing to say in this context. Could not have said it better. Productivity looks so different for so many people, but it's ingrained in us that it needs to be quick, it needs to be done in a day. There needs to be a deadline. That's just not how it works for everyone, especially people with mental illnesses. I think that one of the biggest hits that so many people with depression take is their ability to keep up with things, especially with deadlines. And when you can keep up with things, people just go back to this idea of, there's something wrong with you. You're doing this wrong. And I think this deeply rooted stigma makes depression that much harder for people and makes them feel so much guiltier for having it. And I just feel like there's, like, this similar stigma with, like, the idea of self-care and being able to keep up with yourself. And just, like, brushing your teeth, not being able to shower as often. There's this, just like when your room is messy, that people refer to as, like, a depression room, when it's just, like, you don't have the motivation to keep up with keeping your room clean, and then because you also have to keep up with work, and you also need to be able to shower, and you just can't do all of it. And the more people look down on you for that, the harder that I find it to keep up with all of those things. I lost my place in my notes. Sorry about that. Yeah, so in the study I was talking about in the beginning of this video, it talks about how the stigma around depression makes it a lot harder to want to get help because you're so afraid of what people are going to think. And it talks about self-stigma, which is negative attitude towards oneself stemming from stigmatizing ideas held by society. And it also talks about perceived stigma, which is the belief that others hold stigmatizing ideas. This was a little confusing to me because these sound very similar. But, long story short, people fear people's responses. And something that I found really interesting was that people fear the professional's response. For, like, when they do eventually reach out to get help, they're afraid that that professional's going to be like, you're insane. This is not normal, even though it's what the professional's for. Silly fear. No need for that. And this study found that personal attitudes and fear of other people's responses make people avoid getting help the most. So basically, just this fear of what people will think if you say, oh, I'm going to see a therapist, I'm going to see a psychiatrist. People are going to be like, you can't do this on your own. Or people are just going to be like, that's not real. You're just lazy. So all of that stigma kind of ties in and makes it really hard for people to get help. And the study that I am still referencing says that help-seeking intention is not a perfect predictor of actual help-seeking behavior. And I just want to note that because with all of the things that I'm saying, mostly coming from this study, the study kind of focused on it. Going back, the study was obviously just, like, predicting behavior, and it wasn't people who had actually gotten help or not gotten help. It was just like, if you were depressed, would you do this? So just something I think was important to make note of. And another study that I have focused on parents with depressed children and how stigma kind of stops them from allowing their children to get help. And gotta go to my notes. Somewhere in the study, in like the little introduction part, it said that common stigmatizing beliefs include perceptions that people with depression are unpredictable or dangerous, that depression is due to personal weakness and is controllable, and feelings of guilt or embarrassment about experiencing depression. I just want to focus on the guilt or embarrassment part of it just because that's what my friends who I asked about it kind of talked about. Once again, guilt and embarrassment obviously stemming from the stigma surrounding having mental illnesses and how it affects your daily life. So, back to this study. The results kind of found that parents with lower levels of stigma generally showed more supportive responses compared to those with high depression stigma. Parents with higher depression scores showed less supportive responses than non-depressed parents. I think that last part is really interesting. I'm gonna rephrase it just because I don't think I read it quite right. But basically parents who were, who had more experience with depression or were more likely to have depression were less supportive of having kids that had depression, whereas non-depressed parents were more likely to be supportive of their depressed children and getting them help. And I think that is so interesting. So basically, if, you, not you, but if a parent has depression, they internalize that embarrassment and the guilt so much that they would not not let their kid have it, but they would not want to believe that their kid has it because they're like, I feel like there's something wrong with me, so that means if you have depression, there's something wrong with you. So all in all, what I mostly found in this research was that a lot of people don't get help for depression, a lot of people don't get help for depression because there is this stigma about being lazy, about there being something wrong with you, about not being able to take care of yourself and get things done. And it all just kind of stems from that. And I just want to say that don't be embarrassed. Not gonna help you. No one is really going to judge you, and if they are going to judge you, it's probably because they're having the same experience, and I think that talking about that can help people want to get help. I'm a person that goes to therapy. I have a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and I do everything I can to talk about that and try to make it more normal, especially with people that I know are against those things. I think it's really important to mention that when you can and try to make it as normal as possible, because there's nothing more normal than getting help and allowing yourself to feel joy and to find the bits of happiness when you're not doing well, rather than feeling guilt about it. There's no shame in not being able to handle things on your own. Thank you for listening. I hope some of this made sense. I hope this helped some people out there.